SIGA, the world's largest coalition in the field of sports governance and integrity, brings you the third webinar of the series COVID 360 Where Does Football Go Now? In partnership with SIGA-Soccerex. This third episode will take a deep dive into the new normal and how it will look for football clubs around the world, and how football can best meet the challenges posed by the current global pandemic and move sports integrity forward. We have an absolutely stellar lineup of speakers, including Sir David Richards, former chairman of the English Premier League, senior vice president of the FA and chairman of the European Professional Football Leagues, amongst many other senior roles in world football. Umberto Gandini, co-founder and former first vice president of the ECA, former CEO of AS Roma, legendary director of AC Milan and current president of the Italian Basketball League. Theo van Tekkeling, one of the founding fathers of FIFA Pro, Secretary General of the World Players Union for 30 years and former member of UEFA and FIFA Football Strategies Councils, amongst many other roles. Ashley Brown, Head of Governance and Club Liaison at the Football Supporters Association, former CEO of Supporters Direct and Director of Portsmouth FC. And completing our list, our host, Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros, CEO of SIGA, Chairman and CEO of SIGA America, co-founder and former CEO of the European Professional Football Leagues and World Leagues Association, member of the UEFA Professional Football Strategy Council and several standing committees at FIFA, UEFA, European Commission and several other international organisations. Moderating this webinar we have David Eads, sports journalist and presenter at BBC News.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. First of all, thank you so much for signing up and then tuning in to what is the third SIGA-Soccerex webinar as we discuss some of the critical issues thrown up by this extraordinary pandemic, these remarkable few months that we've been going through and will continue to go through, of course. We are all part of the Zoom boom generation, I think they're calling it already. It's nice to know Zoom at least is making good money out of what's happened to all of us over the last few weeks and months, but it does give us this great platform. And as you've just heard, we've got some speakers with the most extensive experience and expertise and insight into the world of football to talk through what we're at least addressing first and foremost as what we'll call the new normal for now. I think what we've seen over the last few weeks is that that new normal is going to be different for pretty much every country in the world, different in terms of the pace of returning whatever normality is and the extent to which that can happen. I mean, we've seen with South Korea, for example, which has really had a hold on the pandemic from the early stages. They've been much quicker out of the blocks. The K-League, as you know, has been well underway. If you look at Europe, then the Bundesliga, they're learning as they go, but they are underway. Again, a country which has had, I suppose if I can put it this way, a pretty good campaign in terms of dealing with the coronavirus. Now, though, as you are all too well aware, it's the Premier League 2 weeks from today, which will kickstart the season. And a few days after that, the Italian League will follow. It creates a lot of anticipation, of course. There are still many questions to be answered as to the practicalities, the modalities as to how this is all going to hang together. And Premier League clubs have to tackle that tomorrow, first and foremost. But if I could just make one observation, and that is of the situation in South Korea again. We hold that up as a sort of beacon of achievement. They opened all their schools once again to full classroom activity a matter of weeks ago, and some of those schools have shut again. They are back to online classrooms because of a spike in COVID-19. So decisions that have still to be made are not hypothetical decisions about what happens if the season doesn't actually conclude. They're very real decisions. And on top of that, of course, we're going to address in this webinar these massive questions about the scale of the impact of the coronavirus itself on clubs, on leagues, on players, and of course, on fans as well, which is why we have the panel that we have in front of us now. And I want to start with a question for all of you, but so Dave, I'm going to put it to you first of all, as it does refer directly to the Premier League. I was having a look at the figures from the UK government on the last 24 hours of cases confirmed, 1,653 cases confirmed over the previous 24 hours, 324 deaths as well. That is more deaths in a day than South Korea has had in total. So this is not just about how things are going to get back to this new normal. I want to ask you, first of all, is the time right? Should there be a return to Premier League football yet?
David, I don't believe the time is right. I think with the deaths and the number of people that are still catching it, we've had another player catch it at Preston yesterday. Now, that has massive ramifications once a player gets it in a club. And I just believe now it's just too early. But it all comes down to money in the end, because we've got contracts with broadcasters and everything. I mean, if the season doesn't finish on a particular day, then the repayment to broadcasters is about £35 million a week. So no matter how much money is involved, the time is not right for the public to be watching it on TV. I think it's a few weeks yet before we should have had it. I mean, there's still 500 people a day going back in hospital. So no, I don't believe it is, sir.
Right, well, that's a sort of message of money over health and safety. Premier League is saying health and safety must come first. Ashley, as a fan and a representative of fans, I mean, you are no doubt champing at the bit to see the football, whether you get in the stadiums or not. But what's your view?
Well, certainly we've got to be led by public health. That has to come first. But I'm not a public health expert. I know a bit more about football than health. We're very keen to reach a point where fans can come back into stadiums, and we're clearly not there yet. That's a long way off. But as Dave mentioned, this also links very closely into money. That's why we have to be realistic. That's why they're trying to go back so quickly in the Premier League. They have to make a judgment about when the time is right and when it's safe for everybody to go back. And that will be different across different countries, different levels of the pyramid. And each one's got to make their own decision. It's being led by the top flight because they're the ones with the big TV deals. Certainly, there'll be a lot of people that are happy to be able to sit on the settee and watch a bit of football. It'll give them some respite through the lockdown. But whether it's the right time or not, I guess we're going to find out, aren't we?
Yeah, the government's perspective has been it'll be good for national morale. Would you buy that a bit?
I think it's good for some people's morale, perhaps not everybody, but yeah, certainly it gives us something to do with an evening or of a weekend if we're sat in front of the TV. But it's even better for the broadcasters and it's better for the Premier League clubs.
Yeah, maybe not for the soccer widows, but there's a lot of money at stake, as you say. Umberto, let me bring you in because the Italian league is following a matter of days later. Again, if I look at the figures, you are in a rather healthier state as a nation after a very torrid time, of course. But I saw there were 55 deaths over the course of the last 24-hour period. I mean, that is a very different scenario. Do you think you've perhaps called this better, or the Italian authorities have called this better in terms of timing?
Well, again, it's a very difficult judgment because, as everybody says, the health of the public is the most important thing, and we shut down all sport activities, say pretty much around 15th of March. Now, it is evidently a situation very similar to the Premier League as far as interests which are involved from the various stakeholders, and definitely for Serie A, the TV money is the most important thing. It is at stake now, and the necessity to end up the season in a way that would qualify clubs to the next season, European competitions, and so on and so on. It is also important, even I disagree a little bit from the morale status, because there is ethics before morale, I think. And but the situation from a sanitary point of view is definitely much better than it was before, and we still have 2 weeks to go. Now, today, I think talking about data is the first time that both contagious people and death, Germany is ahead of Italy, which is a interesting take from a certain point of view. But you know, the time is right. I think that it is very important for the clubs to come back to action. It is very important to control a little bit the strong tension that there is between broadcasters, among broadcasters and the Italian league, and therefore the fact that we still have a target, an opportunity to start. Obviously, nobody can say now that if we will be able to finish off the season, but at least to start is very important.
Yeah. Theo, you've spent your career looking after, representing players. They are at the heart of this, even more than fans, in fact, because they are the ones who have to gather, they have to train, there'll be warm-up matches now, and then they get down to action itself. Where do you sit on that question of timing? Do you think this is the right time for the Premier League to start, given the state of the coronavirus epidemic in the country? Okay, I can't hear Theo at the moment. I don't know if he can...
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah,
got you now.
With the connection. But I heard I followed the question and the discussion. Of course, for me, representing football players, it is of course unbelievable important. The health of the players is for us number one, and as we all know, for instance, in the Netherlands, where we are based, you see that immediately there was not a lot of discussion that the competition in the Netherlands, like in France, stopped amateur football even earlier. And of course, football players wants to play, but in this exceptional case, of course, the health of players, and forget all the consequences, is number one. It seems to be, but also I'm not an expert, like all my colleagues in this panel. It seems to be that the situation is better, and we see what happens. Every country has its own idea about it, but we see that that countries are struggling with it still on the worldwide level. There are federations even who are saying you are obliged to play. There are federations, the governments who say you are able to play, but the federation is not willing to play. It's very complicated, and country per country, we have to deal with it. We as FIFA cannot give an answer on this difficult question. Let's hope that, understanding that the health of players is crucial, and let's hope that, it's going into the right direction.
Right. Theo, I'm going to stop you there. While you take a pause, if you can find a way to get your screen turned, that's got it. We've got you there. That's what we wanted. Brilliant. I'm going to come back to you on players and their sort of health status in just a moment, but I do want to bring in Emmanuel as well, because Emmanuel, yes, here you are sitting atop the SIGA. Integrity is in the title. We've just had an opening gambit, which is actually about its money and health and safety and integrity. I mean, what's the balance? Is the balance right in England at the moment?
Hi, David, and hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to embark on this conversation with very dear friends who know a lot about football and have also a huge experience of life. I think that this dilemma is a dilemma that haunts every football executive, every leader of the national health systems, and every politician in the world. The balance between the supreme value, which is life and health, versus finding a pragmatic, feasible way to restore normality, to regain our lives, to put our economies back in motion in order to avoid the consequent adversities and impact that this global pandemic is already causing. So sleepless nights, I believe, is something in common to every individual, and we, of course, are not the exception to the rule. But I think it's fair to say two things. First of all, the reality is not the same everywhere. The reality in the UK is not the same, for example, in Portugal, where the league will kick off tonight, in a matter of hours. But what is common between all these leagues and all these competition organizers is that surely they have not taken this decision lightly. There was heavy consultation with health authorities, with government, with law enforcement, in order to ensure that, as far as we can predict, everything runs smoothly and without any danger for public health or for human lives. No one wants this. But I think it's fair to acknowledge that it's a huge, huge dilemma, which involves major responsibilities. And I think Dave just mentioned how much would be at stake from a financial level if the Premier League would not resume right now. But again, we will not have fans in the stands. It will be closed doors. And I appreciate Ashley taking part in this conversation, because I believe that so far everyone was focused on league executives and players, and perhaps underestimating the component of the fans and the supporters in the beautiful game. So thank you for that. But the situation is pretty much the same everywhere. A great sense of responsibility have led to put in place a number of preventive measures. And I just hope that everyone, including the fans, play their part, because the worst that could happen would be to have hordes of fans in the vicinity of stadiums, even if the matches are played at closed doors. So our appeal is that for this sense of responsibility from everyone, so that we can enjoy on our smartphones, on our television sets, we can enjoy football being back into the pitch.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure Ashley will have something to say about responsibility of fans in due course, because everyone knows the draw is going to be massive at various stages in this restarted season. But let me come back to you, Dave, then on that question of money. The figures that I've got of the clubs will have to pay back, Premier League this is, £762 million if the season isn't completed. No wonder they want to get on with the job. Give us some sense of really what the financial framework is here, the scale of it.
It's absolutely huge, David, because I think you've got to look at exactly what is the situation in England with financing clubs. It's catastrophic in most clubs. I mean, if you look back on the kind of profits that the clubs were making in the Premier League in 2010, 2012, 400 million. If you look at last year, they made 50 million. If you look at the Championship, they lost 394 million. Now, what coronavirus has done, it's actually stopped clubs playing from March. So there's 3 months with not a penny income into clubs, but they're still paying players. So where does it lead you? The clubs are going to have to look at fans. Are they going to pay the season ticket holders back? What are they actually going to do? Because it really is a major, major problem with the losses that they're exactly making at the moment. So next season, where do they start? How do they start? If you look at the Premier League, its income in 20 clubs last year were 5.15 billion. The players took 3.12 million out of that. That's 2 billion left for 20 clubs for everything. Something radical has got to happen. Corona has actually triggered what should happen. They should sit down and look at it now and start to consider the finance, because in England, it's the national game.
Well, it's going to have a massive impact on clubs, but also players. Theo, those at the top end, on the top rung of the football ladder, do earn extraordinary amounts of money, as we know. Is it incumbent on on some of those to accept there needs to be a more even spread? I mean, what do you do about it?
Now, we've seen, of course, as I said, we cannot solve this problem on a global level because in every country the situation is different. But what we have seen up till now is that in a lot of countries, also, of course, with the support of FIFPro, we'll see that also players realize that this problem, and I fully agree with Dave, that this is a nightmare for not only, of course, football, but we talk about football. And what is the reality is that players are aware of the fact that also they have to, and then we don't talk about the gift of a player, but that they also have to realize that, and the discussions are following in every country, follow that, of course, that they're realizing that if you don't play, that you also have to contribute to solve the problem. And I have to see that, especially in Europe, we'll see that the players are understanding that. So what, in my opinion, is very important is that clubs, players, federation, the international federation, everybody has to be involved, and that everybody has to realize that we need all the stakeholders to solve this problem, and including, of course, players. That does not mean, by the way, that you could say, that happens also in some countries, that federations or league decide we're going to reduce the salaries for 50%, and we'll see, and we don't respect the contracts. It is about cooperation. It's about having the relationship together on a national level and find solutions which are reasonable for everybody.
Right, but I wonder if you think that, I mean, that is a very sensible, reasonable perspective to take. But from what I've seen, looking at transfer gossip, for example, at the top end, the transfer fees being talked about are still astronomical. You've already pointed out the Dutch league season is over, as is the French, the Belgian, a number of seasons are over. So there's a huge loss of money there. How do you instill that understanding that there is not enough money to go round, and yet at the same time keep bringing in the big guys? I mean, it does feel like we're about to enter into an abyss where you've got the big clubs who can still manage, and frankly, everybody else.
Yeah, that's a good remark, because, you know, I am like all of my colleagues in the panel are involved in football already for a long time. And take the last couple of years before the corona, we are discussing with each other the real changements which are necessary, the so-called package of measures, the 11 points from the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, where we see that, and now it's even more needed than ever, that the word distribution is a word which everybody is talking about, but we have to be realistic. Up till now, we are not able together to come to a compromise and to have a better balance in football. And frustration with FIFPro is already for a long time is really big, because it seems to be that the transfer regulations, the regulations about agents, that it is absolutely necessary that we are going to take that serious. Because if we don't do that, then we really have to be afraid that we are losing 50% of the players playing as a professional, but also 50% of the clubs. So I think that now the time has come that we all have to sit together and face the fact that the system as we are having now is not functioning. And that is not about players only. It's about the fact that these transfer sums which are being paid are, in our opinion and in my opinion, ridiculous. And it's really necessary to have a radical change of the way of thinking in our industry.
Can I just point out to everyone who's joined us as well, and thank you again for being with us. There is an opportunity for questions from you as well. I should have mentioned that at the top, really, but please do send your questions in that you'd like to address to our panel, and I'll make sure they're going to be curated for me, but I'll make sure we get into questions in due course. Umberto, let's focus then on two huge clubs, AS Roma, AC Milan. You've got insight and experience of both of those. Do they, I mean, are they now in a world where they have to recognize realities of finances again in order to stay afloat even, or are they simply too big to fail in that regard and they will plow on regardless? Because this is, you know, you want to win championships. You don't want to come second, third, fourth. You don't want to be a friendly neighbor to another club particularly. You want to win things.
Well, it is an interesting question, even if the two clubs are in a similar situation, but in a very different status, if I may say. AC Milan went through a lot of changes in the last 3-4 years. The sale from Mr. Berlusconi to the Chinese owners, then Elliott Found taking over in 2018, and the way they've been managing this through the recent seasons, the necessity to go back to a certain playing level of a top club, but the difficulties that they were coming, I think they've been preventing AC Milan to went back, and in the same time to reduce losses. I think losses at AC Milan are still staggering and very, very worrying, but at least in that situation there is a strong, I should say, ownership, even if it's a strange situation there. AS Roma is a club that has been constantly counting on the investments from the American owners, Jim Pallotta and his partners. They were very, very close to a sale process ending just before coronavirus exploded, and now the situation from the financial standpoint, you know, a situation for a club that, as you said, has not played a single match in almost 3 months, and has paid pretty much regularly all these players, and the revenues coming from sponsorships and from other revenue streams, how can I say, frozen. So this is a big problem. I think Roma is a huge debt that they are trying to face through different situations, bonds which has been placed on the market, but now definitely it is a very, very alarming situation for the books of AS Roma. But in general terms, I think that we have to change the perspective a little bit, because as you said before, we are now talking about a group of those who have, and we are talking about the big clubs who mainly have cash, because liquidity now is the king. And there are clubs in the top 10, top 15 usual money list that can, how can I say, face pretty much everything. But what is worrying me, what Sir David says, he says that the majority of the revenues are going into the player salaries, and this is not stopping at all. And the distribution money that usually were coming from the top clubs down to the system through transfers are not going to be there anymore, because now the numbers who are going to qualify a player movement are mainly the salary that the player is making. And when players reach the top 10, top 15, top 20 clubs in Europe, they get to a salary point in which they can only go to a similar club. And therefore, in a moment in which you don't have a lot of cash available, we will see a lot of loans, we will see a lot of exchange among top clubs and using players to somehow balance the book. So what used to be a problem in a certain league, in particular in Italy, you remember the added value of transaction that was used in the past to balance the books is now becoming a European system.
Well, that's interesting. Actually, I'm sure your heart is not bleeding, particularly for the top 10 to 15 clubs in Europe. You are a director at Portsmouth Football Club. You have different issues. Is there any way that you can see this extraordinary moment, this massive crisis, serving a purpose in terms of redistribution, of supporting the little guys, if you like?
Absolutely. I think, as been mentioned already by a couple of my colleagues on the panel, this is a wake-up call to football. And speaking specifically about the English leagues, we've already highlighted the fact that the main reason we're going back to the Premier League playing games behind closed doors is because they need that money. But that money is not just important to Premier League clubs, it has a huge impact across the whole football pyramid in England. And what we see is the vast majority of football clubs, certainly professional football clubs in this country, working on a hand-to-mouth type process. You know, the money they get in, they spend very quickly, and some of them, quite a lot of them, spend more money than they get in. So when we have had a virus like this, has had an impact where revenues have ceased, or at least revenues around matchday operations, which are hugely important outside the Premier League, clubs start running into trouble. And hopefully it's a wake-up call that things do have to change. You know, we have to ensure that the football pyramid is stronger, that football clubs are more sustainable, and everybody's going to have to change a little bit to make that happen. In fact, a little bit. I think everyone's going to have to change quite a lot. But I think there is now perhaps a growing appetite to do that in English football.
Is there? I mean, do you really? Because I would have thought there's still this possibility, and maybe we'll get onto a breakaway league in due course, but the top Premier League clubs are not interested perhaps in supporting, in holding up, in providing a crutch to those in lower leagues.
Well, I think, yes, you're quite right. I think the accountants that are looking at the spreadsheets of those top clubs in the Premier League, they're thinking about how they can get more money in, not spend more. But I think there is a growing change amongst the governing bodies in football, and also in government, in Parliament, to realise that perhaps we need to force football to change a little bit. I hope it doesn't trigger a breakaway league in Europe, but the football pyramid is hugely important to the success of the Premier League. The pyramid is in England is one of the great things about football is the opportunity to be promoted and to be relegated. You know, that's the excitement, and it's not just all about promotion, because you can't have promotion without relegation. There's been, I think, 49 or more clubs playing the Premier League since it started, and if you look back before the Premier League started, I think there's over 60 clubs have played in the top flight. 23 clubs have won the league, and a lot more have won the FA Cup. That's the beauty of football, is the opportunity for all, not to see the same 2 or 3 clubs winning things every season.
Right, let me just bring in Dave Richards on that then, because Dave, you've experienced it all from the inside, of course. Rick Parry, who chairs the English Football League, said the other day that basically parachute payments, so the huge sums that are given to Premier League clubs who are relegated, have to go, that they're, I think he called them poisonous, in fact, in terms of that cascade down, because every other club gets a meager fraction of that. Can you see that money, you know, those tens of millions going to 2 or 3 clubs, actually being filtered further down the track now? Because that obviously would give a lifeline to many of the smaller clubs.
I think, David, the answer to that is no. These are private companies now, the big private companies, and they need the revenue streams that they need. But unless someone can get hold of wages and agents' fees and start to do something about it, there's no chance that these clubs will give more money down the pyramid. I mean, if you look what the Premier League give away each year, it's millions. Now, you might say out of £4 billion a year, 200 million is nothing. But 200 million to the football league, plus the parachute payments, is a lot of money. It really, how do you stop the clubs who are coming to the Premier League paying daft, stupid wages to players and getting relegated in the next year, they contracted the players for 3 years. They'd go bust if we didn't give them the parachute payments. It'd be far better to distribute that parachute payment across the 24 clubs in the championship. Yeah, it'd be wonderful. But what happens to the 3 clubs, or perhaps 5 clubs a year, because you get follow-on the following year? What would happen to them? They'd go bust. So unless someone, and Theo, I like what you're saying when you say about you're trying to get understanding with players. The big problem we have in football, there is no natural leadership that wants to sit and talk about this. We've got FIFA, we've got UEFA, we've got the FA, we've got the Football League, we've got the Premier League, we've got them all. But nobody is going to lead this discussion. Now, this is football's problem. It's not government's problem. It's football's problem. Another thing you're going to have to think about, Theo, is when the English leave Europe through Brexit, the foreign players will drift away because they will not get visas, because our government actually know that these guys are getting paid huge fortunes, playing for 3 years, then disappearing abroad to another country that pay them even more. So unless somebody gets hold of this and starts to naturally lead this discussion, I mean, you talk about a Super League. The Super League is nearer than what you think, because in England, we have the Super League. We've got the 6 clubs. The 6 clubs make profit every year, and they spend millions, as you know. But it can't continue because there's 20 clubs in Premier League. And other 14, 15 clubs don't make a bean. They make losses because they're trying to compete with the 6 big guys.
Right, let me take that, Dave. Let me take that. Sorry to interrupt you on that point, but I want to throw that actually to Emmanuel, because it feels like we're going to go round in circles here, in spite of everything that's happening with the coronavirus pandemic and the huge financial restraints. It's not going to change fundamentally the attitude of the richer clubs towards the poorer clubs. And without that, you don't have the sort of breakup and reform or the role of agents, for transfer fees, for salaries, which is, of course, something that you campaign strongly for.
Yeah, well, I think I am finding this discussion extremely interesting, and listen to Dave telling the truth the way it is, without any euphemisms. I think it should ring lots of bells everywhere, because if the new normal, which appears to be the phase that we are now entering to, is equal to the old normal, and we will see the same problems, the same issues, the same dogmas repeating month after month, I wonder what's the reason for all this? What's the reason to demand people to make so much sacrifices, to be confined, to lock down their businesses, to be patient, to be optimistic, if everything remains the same? Obviously, it cannot remain the same. And I think there are 3 major consequences resulting from the past 3 months and what we have learned out of all this global pandemic, incoming economic crisis, and in-house confinement. The first is it has exposed sports vulnerabilities, not only football, but sport as a whole, because there are many sports who would not survive at the end of the month without the transfer coming from the so-called Olympic solidarity. That is something that one day will be discussed. So the precarious financial sustainability of sport and its inequities I think are more visible than ever. They are naked, they are exposed. The second is where these vulnerabilities exist. Well, first of all, I think it has been mentioned here, but I would summarize. Polarization of revenues with concentration of wealth on big clubs in detriment to a small portion of clubs who barely make it to survive at the end of the month. The increase of financial gap, which leads to the success on the pitch being dictated by the financial muscle clubs have, which in turn leads to erosion of uncertainty of results. It's not a random accident that you have always the same clubs winning at the national level and winning international competitions. It is based on revenue-fueled supremacy on the transfer market and consequently on the pitch. But I think the other consequence is that we cannot tolerate more excuses. And clubs need to look themselves into the mirror and see how they are spending all this money, because the ability to generate revenues and wealth and redistribution is amazing and should be applauded. But the amount spent on transfer fees, on players' wages, on agents' commissions, I mean, it's insane. It's insane. And if there is a reason why leagues were set up and club associations were created, was exactly to ensure not just level playing field, but balance and rational management. Because without that rationality, it cannot be only left to passion, because passion will lead to bankruptcy and this. And finally, allow me this final remark.
Yep, quick.
Be very, 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 very sensitive to the signal that is coming from Minnesota and other parts from the US. People have had enough. They have had enough of discussing the same problems, the same reforms, the same working groups that were discussed 10, 15 years, 20 years ago, and nothing changed. Are the problems that we are discussing similar, different from the ones we were discussing 5, 10 years ago? They are not. But now they are exacerbated. And so the time for talking shops is done. The time for navel gazing is done. It is time to face the reality and take what needs to be done to restore common sense and ensure that sport prevails beyond this crisis.
Okay, Manuel, thanks very much for that. I'm beginning to get some questions coming in here, which also reflect actually those of you who have registered. We've got more than 400 registrations for this webinar, which is fantastic. And we've got people who are joining us, and I'll just give you a quick list here. Panama City, Indonesia, Portugal, Amsterdam, USA, Brazil, Madrid, Trinidad and Tobago. I would apologize for us focusing so much on Italy and the Premier League, given that list, but I know from the questions coming in that you have a keen interest on those topics. And I'm going to turn to the questions in just one moment. After asking you, Ashley, we've just touched on the idea of a new breakaway league for the super clubs, if you like. Would that bother you or other fans of a club of let's say Portsmouth's sort of status in the football world?
Yeah, I think supporters across the whole of Europe are pretty much all anti-European Super League. Even many of the fans of those clubs that would be included in it. But I think also, as we've spoken about, we recognise there has to be some change in football, and it's important that supporters are involved in that dialogue, right at the top, right at the top table. Talk about involve supporters in those discussions. And we look at key principles that we would argue that perhaps would be impacted by a European League. Things like we must protect the TV blackout. That's really important. We wouldn't want to see an increase in televised matches, because for the real football fan, live football is what it's all about. The principle of solidarity payments, we've just been covering that. Those have to continue, and it's solidarity across not just in the Premier League, down into the Football League and below, but in European Cup competitions as well, solidarity there. An open pyramid system, an open cup system, that's important. Promotion, relegation. We don't want the same clubs in the same league every season. We don't want the same clubs in the same cup every season. So we have to bear those things in mind. But most of all, talk to the fans. They're key stakeholders in this, the same as the players, the same as the managers. We need to be involved in those discussions, because we're the ones that don't go away. We're the ones that football need back right now to make sure it continues.
Yeah, and you will be the ones who get back in the ground as and when you can. Okay, I want to bring in some questions, and we're going to start with one from Putra Kartono from Liga 1, that's the Indonesia Pro Football League. Should there be an option for clubs to withdraw or neglect to participate, as Pucha puts it, so just not take part in, if you like, Operation Restart, or is it economically not viable to do so? Umberto, what do you think? I mean, if individual players might say, I'm not comfortable with this, and I think Theo would recognise that is the case, and we've seen that in England with Black and Asian minority ethnic players in particular saying the figures don't look good, we don't want to do it. What about clubs though? There must be a sort of, what do you think? Should there be a moral right for clubs to say this is not for us?
Well, again, I don't think it's correct. I think that you are part of a system. You represent a portion of a broader interest. So I think you should be commanded to play. Now, obviously, down to individuals is absolutely fair and acceptable. And as the same thing that we have seen into the discussion about potential cut over salaries over a certain period of time. I mean, at the end of the day, it is an individual negotiation, and it is between an entrepreneur and a worker, so to say, the player and the club. Representation is also a problem in certain cases. So the league is composed by a certain number of clubs. The league decides under certain majorities, respecting their own status and statutory regulations. I think that there is no space for individual decisions as far as clubs are concerned.
Yeah, might not work there in that respect. Here's another one. Louis Regler of Zylobands is asking, are there any plans to engage fans at home that you know of? How long is it going to be before fans get bored of looking at empty seats? And what technology could be used to really engage with fans at home? Let's start with you, Ashley. I think the Germans, at least some of the clubs, have started putting fans' noise over the match, at least for those watching from home.
Yeah, I mean, we're, as an organisation, I think we're not supportive of anything that tries to replace the real fan.
There's no cardboard cutout of Ashley Brown rating.
Cutouts and artificial noise.
In Germany,
not a fan of that at all. But we recognise the need in some countries to continue to play behind closed doors, and clubs need to be smart and progressive in finding ways to engage fans, because what they've actually got is a large part of their fan base that are not used to watching games on TV. They're used to being in the stadium. So it's almost a new experience for them. So I think they've got to look at doing some far more localized content, finding ways to engage fans. I know there's a couple of clubs in the English Premier League that are already talking about that and looking to do things which sound quite intuitive. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Theo, obviously players have to work out how they respond to empty stadiums as well. What sort of initiatives do you think might work?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Of course, if you talk with the players, who's having another opinion about that than the players themselves, it's of course, if you talk with the players, for them to play without public and without fans is, of course, more or less a nightmare. They are obliged to play, but we also have to admit that in these circumstances there is no other solution. And maybe if you ask me, if you ask the players, sometimes, and I heard some of my colleagues in the panel saying, yes, players, they're earning too much. It is in Indonesia, these players are in a completely different circumstances than in England, by the way. But it is also so simple to think that it is all about players. Players are willing to play, of course, with a full stadium. Players are starting to play football at the age of 7, 8 years old. And some of them are lucky and they are going to be a top star player. The mentality of the players is at the end that they love football. Otherwise, you cannot be a professional player. So for them to play without public as a professional player is, of course, a nightmare, as I said. But the reality of today is that we can, unfortunately, for the next couple of months, we will not change that.
If, Umberto, if this goes on for longer, is it sustainable in terms of a practice of something to do? I mean, I know the figures for watching German football here in the UK hit a massive peak a couple of weeks ago. I don't have the figures in front of me, but they've certainly dropped and drifted from that.
Yeah. Well, it was a sort of a necessity for the people to see some football, and all of a sudden there was I must be honest, I think there's been also a big hype of expectations about seeing football again. So everybody was just looking to turn out and see the game on German TV. And then the next day they say, well, is it it? Well, we do think our football is much better. We like our teams and so far and so long. And, so that has drifted away a little bit. The problem is that if we have to look at the evolution of the sanitary emergency and the pandemic, we all know that something's going to happen maybe again when winter times come back again. And we've been taught now that social distances or physical distances and face masks are the most important thing that we should do. So if you have environments of 60, 70, 80,000 people seated stadium, well, you can definitely look into that with a different attitude and work on social distancing into that and still have spectators in the stadium, obviously not these massive and large numbers. And I understand that. I don't think for many lower league clubs to play behind closed doors will be sustainable. I think will be dramatic. If you talk about Premier League, if you talk about Serie A, there are, especially in the Premier League, huge importance to match day revenues, but TV rights, sponsorships are still covering the major part of it. If you look at Italy, for example, then gate receipts are not so important like they are in other championships. But if you go down the leagues, if you go down the ladder, then it will be much, much more important and would be unsustainable to play behind closed doors.
Right, and let me just weave a question in there, which is coming from EC football agents, actually, related to that. If there is an extension of this problem, if there's an ever-increasing financial squeeze, could a cap on players' wages and a limit on clubs' budgets, creating a level playing field, could that be part of the solution to the problem?
Well, I don't think...
And then David.
Sorry, I thought it was for me, but...
No, Umberto first, yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I don't think that a level playing field by regulations is something that we would like to see. At the end of the day, it's definitely a situation where, as I said before, cash is going to be the king for this definitely immediate emergency and probably down the road for a couple of years. But I think something like what's happening in the NBA as far as the salary cap proportionate to the revenue generating is something that would make some sense. So a collective bargain agreement like they have in the NBA could work. The problem we have is that we are not in the same scenario. Every single country has a different regulation. The European Union, especially now that the United Kingdom is going out, is going to be totally different. There is no possibility to have a system applicable to all leagues, but the indication on working on a percentage of revenues spending for labor cost, I think is something that we should look at that in a different way.
Okay.
But that is already in place.
Yeah, the 70%.
And
the general rule of the 70% within the financial fair play.
And that did not prevent the clubs from spiraling debts year after year.
No, so because we have an ability to spend of certain clubs, which is above any kind of expectations, and there's nothing you can do with that.
Well, debts will continue to spiral if this issue goes on for significantly longer. Excuse me, we're getting relatively close to the end of our time, and I've got a whole list of questions here, and I know we'll not get through them all. So I'm going to dive into one or two and get a quick response from some of you on them. This one from Diogo Cocho in Orlando City Soccer Club, directed at you, Ashley. Don't you think that having players and coaches with microphones, with cameras in the backstage, for example, might be a good trade for the fans who lose that in-stadium atmosphere? That there are things that could be done.
If we're talking about during a match, I think that might work in some geographies. I'm not sure it would go down in England and perhaps a lot of the other European ones. But I think that closer contact of players leading up to and after games, absolutely, I think that will help.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of bleeping going on if it's during the match, unfortunately. I think it's the reality of that. Yes.
Can I just tell you, there's a company working on virtual reality to solve the problem of crowds. They're actually working on it. They've actually done it. And we're actually starting to look at it next week to see how the noise and the virtual reality of people in the stadium works. So it's not that far away, believe it or not.
I think the Bundesliga have made some steps in that direction, haven't they? It's not going to satisfy the Ashley Browns of this world.
Absolutely. I was thinking about Ashley not being very pleased with it.
But when you're selling a product around the world, it's terrible to have empty stadiums, I can tell you.
Absolutely.
I
agree.
You need something.
I'm a big fan of discussing the fan experience and how we can improve fan experience in these troubled times. But there is something which is deeply disturbing, I find it, is that every major progress that was happening in terms of restoring the reputation, enhancing the governance, the financial integrity, and to make sure that all this wealth legitimately earned has a clear path from the origin to the destination. I am deeply concerned with the impact that the coronavirus has left in terms of vulnerability of clubs and the whole industry. I am deeply concerned because I see organized crime taking advantage of these gaps and these vulnerabilities. And although I believe it is important to discuss the passion of the fans and how we can live this new normal, I think it's very, very important that we don't lose more time. We need to listen to the people. People want not scratching the surface or cosmetic measures. They want reforms. And they want reforms now. And this is why the sports world reflects a proper democratic structure where leaders are elected to do the job, not to entertain, but to do the job. Reforms. Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going to? What happened with the Panama Papers? Where are the reforms? Aren't the fans also entitled to enjoy clean sport and have answers to these questions that are haunting them? I believe it is time to address that. And I know that each one of my fellow panel members has strong views about this. They have been championing for this for many years. And we need them. We need them more than ever also to shine a light on this and what needs to be done so that sport integrity can be at the podium at all times.
I'm just going to...
Sorry.
Go on, Dave.
Can I add something?
Sorry, Theo.
Yeah. Okay.
You're too polite. Theo, you go first.
Okay, sorry. Now, Emmanuel, what he's saying is right. If we ever have the chance, and I thought everybody who's involved in this game, of course in sports in general, but in football especially, if we, I will say it even stronger, if we are not able in the world of football, with the people who have the experience, with the different representation of clubs, leagues, federations, if we are not able to sit together and to change the regulations in a way, and it's not about ending the transfer system or killing the agents. It's about a reasonable system, and there is so much homework already done in the last couple of years. If you bring these persons together, these specialists representing the different stakeholders, I can tell you in 2 weeks, we are able to come with a system, with regulations, with at least give us a better chance to survive after this nightmare. And I really think also that FIFA could take the lead in that, together with all the stakeholders who are already involved. And let's say it even more strongly. If we don't do it now, it will never happen. If this is not the reason to change the situation, again, forget the details. But if we don't do it now, it will never happen.
Yeah, that feels very pertinent. Dave, you were going to say.
Theo, you've been talking about this for the last 5 or 6 years.
More.
You know, you keep talking, you keep saying it. 5 years ago, the gentleman sat in front of me came very close with the ECA and the European leagues to getting some formulas. Then FIFA and UEFA thought we were stealing things off them. Until you come up with a set of people like the Umberto Gandinis to actually sit down with people who know what they're talking about and to push it really hard, FIFA, UEFA, will carry on because it suits them to carry on. They don't need to change. This doesn't affect them. The coronavirus hasn't affected them. They'll get the money for the World Cups and the European League. We talk. We don't finish. We should now sit down and say, look, we need to put a team of people together who know what they're talking about. And Umberto, you're one of them because you know more about football than half of these have forgot. Theo, you're a really important cop. But there are other people within FIFA and UEFA and the FAs who need to be sorted out and say, look, this is what the game wants. It's what you need.
Okay.
You've got to do it.
That is the commentary of a very blunt speaking Yorkshireman putting no, not far from it, but absolutely what is required. I want to go very quickly around the houses on that basis though, and I do want realism, not emboldened optimism for the sake of it. Umberto, let me start with you. Is this a moment for restart for the good or frankly for the worse?
Well, I think we will have to face 2 phases. The first one is the emergency. I think that it's more important to find measures that are going to solve the incumbent problem for the ending of this season and the beginning of next season. And then we have to take some time and plan properly what we want to have in the future. I understand. Thank you very much, Sir David. It was very, very appreciated what you said. But, you know, we all look at our own kingdom in a certain way, but we all are becoming so important domestically and internationally, like the Premier League is, that sometimes we lose sight of the overall interest of football. And this is probably the most delicate part. But phase 1 is the emergency sustainability of the situation. As I said, there are many, many clubs who are going to be risking a lot, obviously the top clubs, but going down the ladder. And I think this is the most important thing now.
Okay, thank you. Theo, you spelt out a view, a vision. Can you assert a bit more realism than optimism, though?
Yeah, of course. As I always said, football is so strong, is so on the worldwide level the biggest sport, and I think also that we all must, and I have no doubts that representative of clubs, representatives of players, and people working in this business all have the intention. But yeah, I am realistic. Just because, and Umberto is right, we are now in a situation that we have to survive. But and that will be a big problem. But as soon as possible, I think I am optimistic and then also realistic. It must be possible if we all have the good intentions to survive, not only, but also to get a better world within, better regulations within football, where we better protect the clubs and players. And of course, if you look at the situation in the United States, which we have a lot of study done over there, it's simple. If you in every country have a collective bargaining agreement between clubs and players, that will be very helpful. And I am optimistic. I still think that we have such a strong sports. Football is so unbelievable important for all of us that
it has to happen
with some, and of course everybody has to give and something to that is the negotiation which we need to have.
But well, that's the challenge.
I am very optimistic that it is possible, but we must not wait another 5 years.
Okay, Ashley, can you see a more positive future for Portsmouth FC and others coming your way, or are you more of a, dare I say it, a realist?
I hope so. I mean, you know, we've been fighting for reform in English football for a long time, and we have in recent months initially kicked off through the demise of Bury last year, but also through the current pandemic. We have seen a real change in acknowledgement amongst football club owners and executives that things are going to have to change. Umberto and Theo are right now. We need to get through the crisis, make sure all those clubs survive. But coming out of it, you know, I hope that we can build, not just in the UK, but across UEFA countries, a world where football clubs at all levels become more sustainable. Because, as I've said before on this call, it's all those clubs that make the game so wonderful, not just a handful at the top. And let's make sure that, you know, we continue to be able to create an environment that all clubs at all levels can flourish.
And briefly, Emmanuel, are you in the Dave Richards camp or the Theo van Zegelen camp?
Well, the first thing that I would like to say, and I will leave Dave to the end, is what I heard in this discussion, very informative, high level, fully in line with my expectations. And I must say that I was missing this, guys. I listened to powerful words which are very eloquent. Crisis, wake up, and change. And with change, reforms. Now, I understand that we need to be pragmatic and we need to tackle the emergency, but we always need to be ahead of the curve. That is what you expect from true leaders, is that they anticipate the problems, they set the trends in order to avoid dealing with negative consequences, such as the ones that we are facing. SIGA has a clear vision for sport. We acknowledge our role. Our role is part of a greater machinery, but we have a clear reformist vision based on sports values and its impact in society and economy. And this for this reason that we have mobilized the whole industry to design and implement a set of universal standards that cover the whole spectrum, the whole landscape, not just of football, but sport. Also, soon we will be testing the SIGA independent rating system so that the fans that Ashley represents and the sponsors and the broadcasters and everyone who fuels their passion into sport knows that it's not just mere vocal proclamations of fit for purpose. It is the real deal. Objective, independent, rigorous assessment of whether they comply with the standards and justify our passion and our investment. I would also like to say, because there is still a long way to go, strides were made, but they are insufficient. We have announced yesterday that we are organizing and spearheading Sport Integrity Week. We want to shake the waters. We want provocative thoughts. We want trailblazers. We want troublemakers in the Kerouac expression. We want to discuss everything and come up with the united front. That is precisely what Theo and Umberto and others were appealing, a united front. And finally, speaking of united front, one last remark to my dear friend Dave, and all my other friends will understand why I make this reference. It's because in 3 days from now, there will be the 15th anniversary of the constitution of the Association of European Professional Football Leagues, which was a visionary project that Dave and I so much work to put in place. And if we were able to do that and change the governance of the game then in very adverse political and cultural circumstances, I think we, and I mean all of us and others that are listening to us, can also overcome this unprecedented adversity and transform it into an opportunity for success.
Well,
so thank you very much,
Emmanuel,
all of you, for accepting the invitation. And David, I'm sorry if I frustrated your expectations about being brief.
I know you well enough,
I
Emmanuel.
am not a saint, and miracles are not my department.
Well, no, but a good summation of where we've got to. Look, I want to thank all of our panelists. Dave, obviously, Theo, Umberto, Ashley, Emmanuel as well. Thank you so much for that. Thank you too for everyone who's contributed. I'm just going to close actually with a couple of questions which can hang a little bit, but here's one from Dia Delil. Arsene Wenger said the Super League is inevitable. Given his new role, who can stop it? And one from Jonathan Booker of Chiron Sports and Media. As the leagues are now largely controlled by the clubs with the financial muscle, these clubs are unlikely to make sacrifices to benefit those lower down the pyramids. And given that 2 weeks from now, the next webinar is entitled Football for All, and we've had a somewhat male-oriented panel for you today, and apologies for that, a question that I think it deserves to come up then. Amanda Burrows offered us this from Southampton Women's Football Club. We're repeating this model of financial inequality in the English women's game, with poorer but more historic clubs being pushed down the pyramid by richer clubs running their women's sides at a loss. How do we ensure we don't repeat the same mistakes as this side of the sport grows? I mean, that is a burning question to take us on as a trail to 2 weeks from now. But for now, we're right up on the clock. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you all on board. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe.